Hey guys, okay, real quick lesson on how to graph inequalities where the variable is on the right hand side. A lot of y'all have been taught to graph inequalities where the variable is on the left hand side, and although it's not different to some of y'all have been told that the arrow in the inequality, like right here, points to which way you're going to graph, but that's not the case if the inequality has been flipped around. So we're going to talk about how to really read these as well as how to graph them. So let's look at the top left-hand problem. We read this as 4 is less than x, okay? Well, we've been told that when you're putting them on a number line, you have to have your critical number, 4, and some other numbers to represent just what the number line looks like. You should always make it go from least to greatest, so I'm just putting 3, 4, 5 on here. So 4 is the number we care about. We can already tell that. We're going to have an open circle because this just says less than. If it said less than or equal to, then we'd have a closed circle, but it's just less than. So we want to make sure now that we know which way the arrow goes. The arrow represents what your variable stands for, right? So if I'm looking back up there, my variable is greater than the 4. Now that's not how I read it, right? I read it as 4 is less than x. But if I'm reading it the other way, x is greater than 4. And the part we really care about is the x. So what you can do is you can rewrite it so that the x comes first and the 4 comes last. But when you do so, you have to really look at the original problem and see which way the inequality symbol needs to face. So if we look back at the original problem, the x is the thing that's greater, right? If you think about the alligator mouths from elementary school, it's eating the x. We need to make sure it still does that when we rewrite it, right? So if we rewrite it this way, you can see that once again, x is still bigger than the 4. X is greater. When we see that, we now know that we're going to shade to the right, okay? But again, if you look at the original problem, it looks like the arrow is pointing to the left. So you really have to be careful when things are written backwards. You need to either rewrite it so that it makes more sense to you, or really think about which way that arrow is going to face. Okay, so let's do a few more just to make sure we're clear. So on the right-hand side, I've got my 3 numbers. The number I care about is 14. I'm going to go ahead and write 13 and 15 around it so I can see that my number line goes from least to greatest. The number I care about is the 14, so I'm going to go ahead and put my open circle because this is not greater than or equal to, it's just greater than. Now I need to pick the way my arrow goes. Well, again, I'm caring about the variable. So if I'm looking at y specifically, y is smaller. The alligator's eating the 14, so y has to be smaller. You can rewrite this though, if that doesn't make sense. Put your variable first, your number last, then rewrite your symbol. It's going to switch places, right? Just like before it was eating the 14, now it's still eating the 14 on either side, okay? So now when I look at it, I can clearly see that y is definitely less than 14. Y is smaller, so I'm going to shade to the left. Okay, next problem, I'm going to try this one without rewriting it. I'm going to go ahead and put my numbers down. The number I care about is 12. I'm going to go ahead and write 11, 13. I'm going to go ahead and draw my circle. Because this actually is less than or equal to, I'm actually going to shade this circle in. That's the first time I've done that so far. Now, I'm not going to rewrite it. I'm just going to look at my variable. Instead of reading from left to right like we normally do, I'm just going to look at the variable. I can tell that x is the thing that is supposed to be bigger. We want the numbers that are bigger than 12. So that means I need to shade to the right, the numbers that are bigger. You can always test this by looking at where your arrow is shading. Like mine right here is shading the 13. I can imagine it would be on the 14, etc. Well, plug that in. If I put a 14 right here, is 14 greater than 12? Yes, it is. So I did it correctly. If I had gone the other way, I would be shading that 11, and 11 is not bigger than 12. So you can always test yourself. Okay, last one, same thing. It's written backwards, but that's okay. Negative 280 is the number we're dealing with. Remember that you don't have to put the numbers on either side that are consecutive. Like I could jump here to negative 300 and negative 260. Doesn't matter as long as it truly is going from least to greatest. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and draw my circle. It's going to be closed because it says greater than or equal to. My variable h, if I'm reading it from the perspective of the h, I can tell that the h is smaller, right? It says h is smaller than that negative 280, so I need to shade smaller, which is always to the left. Okay, again, I can plug these numbers in. I could test a negative 300 and see if it works right here. Well, yes, negative 280 is greater or equal than negative 300. Okay, so it's just a quick little review on how to shade or how to graph these inequalities if the variable is on the wrong side.